What if I told you that the most powerful brain hack that we have is actually free? I'm not talking about supplements. I'm not talking about nootropics. I'm talking about just moving your body. Because something interesting happens when you exercise. After just one workout, your brain chemistry changes in ways that can improve your focus, mood, mental clarity, your life. So in this video, I want to explain the neuroscience behind exercise and the brain. What actually happens inside your brain when you exercise. Why exercise improves things like focus, mood, memory, and how much exercise you realistically need to get these effects. Because let's be real, we don't have time to be at the gym all day. To understand why exercise is so powerful for the brain, we first need to talk about two brain regions. The first one is called prefrontal cortex, and it's the area right behind your forehead. It's responsible for things like focus, decision making, planning, and impulse control. So it's basically the part that allows your brain to sit down and actually work, to sit down and concentrate on something. So whenever you are studying, working, trying to solve a problem, your prefrontal cortex is doing a huge amount of work. The second brain structure that we need to talk about is called the hippocampus, and it sits deeper in the brain inside something called the temporal lobe. The hippocampus is very important for learning and memory. Every time you form a new memory, remember something from a lecture, or learn a new concept, the hippocampus is heavily involved. And this brain region has a very interesting property. It's one of the very few areas in the adult brain where neurons can actually grow. For a long time, scientists believed that once you become an adult, the brain stopped producing new neurons. But research over the last few decades showed that that is actually not true. The hippocampus continue producing neurons throughout your life. And one of the strongest triggers for that process is exercise. Wow. So before we talk about those long-term changes, let's start with what happens immediately after you exercise, besides you getting jacked and getting a lot of girls. Because the effects actually begin much faster than most people realize. After a single workout, your brain releases higher levels of several important neurotransmitters. I'm talking about dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline. These neurotransmitters play a huge role in regulating things like motivation, mood, alertness. As I've talked about on this channel before, dopamine is strongly involved in motivation and reward. Serotonin plays an important role in mood regulation, and noradrenaline increases your alertness and focus. So when you are exercising, you're basically creating a neurochemical environment that makes your brain more alert and more responsive. And this is one of the reasons people feel mentally clearer after physical activity. You feel emotionally better, like you get in better mood. So if you're about to study or work on something important, exercising right before can actually make you perform better. But the really fascinating effects of exercise appear when it becomes a regular habit, when it's something that you do all the time. Not just once, because over time, exercise starts changing the structure of the brain itself. One of the most consistent findings in neuroscience is that long-term aerobic exercise increases the size of the hippocampus, and this happens through a process called neurogenesis, formation of new neurons. So, when these new neurons are generated in the hippocampus, they become parts of neural circuits responsible for learning and memory. And this makes your brain's ability to store information much better. So in simple terms, exercise can make the brain memory system stronger, but the hippocampus is not the only region that benefits. Exercise also strengthens the prefrontal cortex. Remember the prefrontal cortex, the area right behind your forehead? The prefrontal cortex plays a huge role in things like controlling impulses and planning complex actions and making decisions. So when this area functions well, we are able to stay more productive and more focused for longer periods. Research actually shows that people who exercise a lot, they tend to perform a little bit better on tasks involving like attention and cognitive control. And this helps explain why physical activity is something that we associate with mental clarity and productivity. One of the most important effects of exercise on the brain has to do with long-term protection, because the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex are also the brain regions that are most vulnerable to aging, because as we get older, these areas tend to gradually shrink. This process is associated with like normal cognitive aging, but it also plays a major role in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. For example, in Alzheimer's disease, one of the earliest brain regions affected is the hippocampus, which is why memory loss is often one of the first symptoms. Now, exercise does not completely prevent these diseases, but some of the research out there suggests that exercise can slow down the rate of decline. So exercise strengthens these brain regions and help them maintain the structure for longer. So you can think of exercise as a long-term investment in your brain's health. But the most important question is, how much exercise do we actually need to see these effects? Well, the good news is that the answer is not extreme. You don't need to be a professional athlete. Most of the research out there suggests that around 30 minutes 4 times a week of aerobic exercise should be enough. The key factor is increasing your heart rate and, getting the cardiovascular system going. So activities like running, swimming, cycling all produce these effects. Choose the one that has the lowest injury risks for you and keep it consistent. That is the most important thing, consistency. So if your goal is to be better at focusing and better at learning and just function better as a human being, exercise might be one of the most powerful brain hacks that we have. So go out there and start running. Go out there and start doing something good for your brain.